Welcome to The Growth Scope, a podcast by Benton Creative that's here to challenge how you think about entrepreneurship, brand building, and client relationships. We're pulling back the curtain on how people really make decisions, what draws them to certain brands, and what quietly turns them away.
Throughout the series, we will take you inside every stage of the customer journey, from the first moment someone discovers your brand to the lasting loyalty that keeps them coming back.
So in this opening episode, we're asking, how much does a founder's mental health really impact the business? Can customers sense when something's off? And how does a founder's state of mind influence not just the brand, but the team, and ultimately, the customer experience? To help us unpack this, we're joined by Dr Claire Plumbly, a clinical psychologist who works with high-performing individuals to create more sustainable ways of living and working. She's the director of Good Therapy Limited and author of the Amazon bestseller, Burnout: How to Manage Your Nervous System Before It Manages You. And I'm joined by my co-host Balazs, our entrepreneur in residence and founder of Benton Creative. Let's get into it. So Claire, we hear the term burnout thrown around a lot these days. But what does the word actually mean from a clinical perspective?
Yeah, so burnout is not an official psychiatric diagnosis, first off, but it does have a definition in the World Health Organization. And the definition is that it's a syndrome stemming from chronic unmanaged workplace stress. So the syndrome has three things. First thing is physical and emotional exhaustion. And that's the one that I think everyone comes to burnout thinking, I've got that. So it's when you're running on empty, you've got nothing left to give. And that's obviously physically, we're lethargic. Everything feels quite heavy. And emotional exhaustion, what that means is when you're just stuck between either irritable and snappy or low and anxious. But it's all the negative emotions and your big repertoire of other emotions like feeling content, feeling calm, feeling happy, feeling passionate about your work, which is obviously very relevant to entrepreneurs. All of that's gone by the wayside. The second part is when we're disengaged. So whereas before you might be really engaged with your work, you're starting to feel quite disconnected maybe from work, your projects, caring about things can be quite scary for someone who's social entrepreneur and change maker to stop losing that sense of caring when that's been a quite central sense of identity. And the third one is when you're just not as efficient, you're just not getting work done in the same way, your level of accomplishments have diminished. So your self-esteem might plummet, when I've experienced that functional burnout, I've started to think I'm a rubbish therapist. If you're a parent with parental burnout, I'm not a good mum, I'm not a good dad. So you feel like you're not doing a good enough job. And to be fair, you might be dropping balls at this point anyway because of these other two parts of the syndrome. So you might not be being as effective as you could be either. So there's some fairness to that. So that's the official definition of burnout.
And I noticed when you gave the definition, one of the key words was workplace overload. Is it just within the workplace you can burn out, or is it other facets of your life?
Yeah, so I talk about this and how a lot of burnout authors are broadening it out, and there is research being more broadened out to not just understanding work as paid work, because that's how we tend to interpret work. And so, there's research going into parent burnout, informal carer burnout, student burnout, athletic burnout. There's actually lots of research and measures coming out for these specific groups. So, for anyone listening to this, it's thinking about where do I do anything that's work-based, and that can be informal, unpaid, the second shift, as we often call it, when you get home and you've got all the, chores around the house to do, the cooking or put the kids to bed and all of that.
And you've done, obviously, a lot of extensive research within this sphere. You've written an amazing book about it. What initially inspired you to research burnout? Is it because you had your own burnout? What was the story behind that?
So just to say, I'm not an official researcher, but I have obviously reviewed the literature for my book, and I'm first and foremost a clinician working with people who've come to therapy. And so, where I work, which is in Somerset, I see a lot of people who work in the nearby hospital, so public sector people. And so I was interested in learning more about burnout so I could provide a treatment model that fitted for their presentations. And yeah, personally, I think a lot of people have gone through burnout. We could talk about the stages of burnout. I've never clinically burned out, which is when you stop and you're unable to get either out of bed or function. And, you know, you can have different signs of that. I've definitely gone through functional burnout, which is when you're pushing through. You're hitting all those 3 signs that I said, but you're struggling to see it.
Yeah.
And you're just feeling that disconnected. You've got all the stress signs in your body and your brain. But it's only after the event that I've kind of gone, oh, hang on a minute, and I've managed to catch it before it's tipped into more clinical shutdown burnout.
So what's that one sign that if I recognize on myself, then I can kind of presume I have burnout?
So I think it's helpful to think about breaking it into potential areas for the signs. And you're right in thinking, what's my personal sign? Because everyone will have their red flags. So what are your red flags for being in stress for a long time? So for some people, they'll get very physiological flare-ups of maybe their eczema or their gut problems or headache, migraines, you know, tension. So physiologically, where's your body at? Cognitively, so where does your brain go? And for a lot of people, it tends to be quite pessimistic, quite low and sad about or worried that this will get any different or this possible way out. So our imagination for you know, a way out diminishes. Your productivity might fall. I'm giving you lots. Sorry, is this okay?
Yeah.
Can I carry on?
Experience some of it, but I never know.
Yeah.
I can never decide if I have burnout or what's going on.
Okay, right. So that's the cognitive stuff. Escapism thoughts. Like, I wish I could just get ill so I don't have to turn up for that thing that everyone's expecting me to do. And, you know, you're struggling to kind of find a way out. And emotionally, yeah, it's stress, it's feeling disconnected. But there's not going to be one thing. You need to know your red flags and how long is the context, how long has that been going on in your life? Because if you're kind of slipping up that slope and it's been in your life for a long time and nothing's changing, your body's only designed to stay in that state of stress for a certain amount of time. And that's when it'll tip into the burnout, which is that disengagement at some point down the line. Does that make sense?
Yes. So how this they tie their self-worth to the success of their company. So how does it impact someone's mental health, and how does it lead to burnout potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's hard, and I do understand that because I run my own business as well. And it does make it really hard. Like, if I put out a social media post or something and it flops or no one sees it, it feels like a personal rejection. So I think trying to get support around you, network and support around you, or coaching, so that you can kind of separate yourself out from the business and you can hold that vision for the business without it needing to be all on you. Because otherwise you're wearing all the hats, you're doing all the things, and you find it really hard to delegate because you're the only one who knows how to do everything just the way you want it. So it can make it really hard to let go of the reins. And, you know, I'm sure you work with people who get a bit perfectionist about things and really struggle to know when to switch off because, you know, so it's not good for your mental health. I completely agree.
Yes.
And so you need downtime. You need to have somewhere where you aren't in your business all the time.
So you mentioned in your book the importance of a social engagement system. So from my experience surrounding myself with entrepreneurs is actually a really good way of dealing with this pressure that we talked about before.
Yeah.
However, so how do you actually build up this system? Is it okay if you just surround yourself with like-minded people, or you want to diversify and talk to different kind of personalities?
Yeah, I mean, all of it. You need like-minded, and I think it's good to have people who challenge your point of view as well. I think the main thing with the social engagement system, we're talking about the kind of the chemistry inside all of us, which is inbuilt in order to help us connect. So, you know, we're born with this. You know, a tiny baby will turn its head in order to kind of seek out faces that they recognise and towards its, you know, parent's voice. And that might seem weird. I'm talking about this in terms of saving your, you know, burnout prevention from a business perspective. But essentially, when we feel connected with others, we're likely to feel safer in ourselves, which means we can take our foot off the gas with being perfectionist and all of that, because we feel like we've got this, we're not going to be rejected, we're going to be socially accepted. So yeah, having like-minded people who can meet all our social needs, and no one person can do that. As we know, if you've ever tried to kind of be in, I don't know, try and get all your needs met from a relationship, for example, it's not going to work. So community's been massive, and I've certainly found that with building my business. I get a pot of needs met from other psychologists, and one met from coaches who have more visibility online. So yeah, I think that's really important.
So just zooming out a little bit and backtracking to, I think a lot of people would get confused between their everyday stress and burnout.
Yeah.
And I think especially the type A personality types, which founders and entrepreneurs typically are, people who are, we say, perfectionism, and people who are quite militant and are able to push through, they might just disregard, it's just every day, it's normal stress that I'm dealing with. How can you determine and distinguish between each one? And is there a difference?
Well, yeah, so there's different types of stresses, aren't there? There's the kind of train being late. There's waiting for a Wi-Fi code that's taking a long time to come. And then there's like the bigger stresses, like I don't have enough money to pay the bills at the end of the month. So there's different kind of qualities of stresses. But if they're all kind of coming in at you all the time, first of all, what can happen is we can start to normalize stress. And so sometimes when I'm in a therapy room with someone and I'm getting them just to outline what's going on in their day, I might be sitting back and helping them to reflect on that is a lot, but they've just got so used to kind of bulldozing through it, so they can't see it. So I suppose that's the first invitation for anyone listening is like, even if it does seem like normal stress, in inverted commas, it might not be okay. You might, need to talk to somebody about systems or getting connections in place so that you can kind of reduce some of the stresses. It's not you being a failure. But yeah, in terms of the difference between stress and burnout, stress is an over-engaged place where you're kind of throwing everything into something in order to get to the other side of the problem. So usually it's goal-focused, our thinking becomes quite kind of narrow-focused in that way. Things can feel a bit urgent, but if you get to the end of solving something, we pass out of that and we can regulate back to a calm place. Whereas in burnout, if you imagine that's happening, but you're trapped in stress and there's no end point ever, the way I describe to my clients sometimes is if you imagine you're playing tennis against a tennis ball machine, and
I love that example.
Yes, we were talking about how you like tennis, and you've got it because you've got one tennis ball machine hitting shots, and then that's maybe the work stresses in one area of your work, maybe the marketing part, and then another ball machine is rolled in, and maybe that's kind of renovations on your house, and you're having to hit the balls back, and you've got another ball machine rolled in, and that's maybe difficulties at home with your elderly parent who needs rehoming, or if you have a lot of ball machines being rolled in and you're trying to hit them all, you're going to start missing balls, they're going to start hitting you. The only place you've got then to go is to curl up into a ball and to try and to not be hit. And that's what burnout's like for us. But in an internal world, you might not actually be physically, well, you might, in a ball, unable to get out of bed, but you can get to that point where it just all feels too much. You're just kind of going through the motions, but not really connecting, just trying to hit the balls, dropping some. It's a much more disengaged place where stress is over-engaged.
Evolutionary speaking, I mean, the way that humans can, like our stress can kind of culminate into a burnout sounds like a pretty poor system we've developed.
Okay.
Evolutionary thing. Is this something that humans have suffered with since the dawn of time, or is this something we've only really seen in the last, few years? Because, comparing to years ago when humans had to think about survival and they were battling the Black Plague and they didn't have heating at home, electricity, our lives seem pretty cushy compared to then. So is this a recent phenomenon, or has this always been something that's troubled humans?
Burnout as a concept's only been around for about 50 years, so it's hard to go back further than that. I think we probably have used different names for different, nervous breakdown, things like that over the years. So it's kind of hard with mental health to measure it because there's always different measures at different time frames. But our ancestors, I suppose, benefited from living more to the time of day in terms of the lights going, and you would have to kind of stop and cozy around the fire and do things like that. You this idea of kind of getting ahead, like to get through the work before it even present itself, was not a thing that they did. They kind of milked the cows when the cows needed milking. They wouldn't get ahead of milking the cows before the cows needed that. Whereas, now our boundaries have just been eroded. And so we can work anywhere and always. And so we do. You know, I've got a phone in my pocket. I'm sure you all have phones, you know, and you could easily pick that phone up and do something to rest, like, you know, log on to your mindfulness app or call a friend and connect. But you're probably not going to do that. You're probably going to open up your work emails and ping off a work email. So basically, we've got this juggle of a to-do list that's never ending, and we don't feel safe enough to pause.
I think you're right entirely. We can never shut off these days. You know, even on the weekend, when you think before you'd be in the office and before there was laptops and phones, you'd turn off the computer or you'd file away your papers for the day, and then you were off home and there was no one who could contact you about work. Whereas now you're on a phone, like you say, paying even on a Sunday or a Saturday morning, you're getting work emails or people just following up on.
And when that perfectionism comes in, and you just never stop because if I stop, I feel guilty.
Yes,
that's the reality of entrepreneurship as well, and I think just working anywhere, to be honest, nowadays.
Exactly. So if you work somewhere where you've got a boss, we really are trying to educate managers about modelling these boundaries and also not sending those out of our emails, because it sends a confusing message, even if they're saying to their kind of employee, don't check your emails, but then you get an email at 8 p.m, that's confusing. But with us, if you're your own boss, you've got to make those policies for yourself. You've got to write the policy. You've got to kind of make a decision. What's my boundary going to be? And a lot of people go into entrepreneurship and become a founder partly because of work-life balance. They've sometimes been pushed a little bit, haven't they, from somewhere else? So you kind of have an idea about what you don't want. But do we ever spend time pausing, thinking, what do I want? You know, you might be thinking about your mission, your values for your business, but you've got to kind of keep that, you know, married up with what you want for your work-life balance too.
I think it's really interesting because when you work on a startup, then they tell you, well, you need to be agile, you can change your idea,
right.
The outcome should stay kind of the same, but sometimes business owners, they still change it. Like, for example, I want to build an app to manage to manage anxiety. But then I realize from the market's feedback that this is not what they need. So I need to change my vision. I need to change where I'm heading to. And I think these sudden changes of directions, it actually can be really impactful on your mental health, and in a negative way, of course.
I mean, in terms of the psychology of that, humans find uncertainty and change hard. You know, when we feel like we know our routine, we know where we're going, we feel safer. You know, I'll keep coming back to that word safe, because that's the essence of what's gone wrong in burnout, is that we haven't felt safe enough to rest and switch off for the day. So, you know, when the rug could be ripped from under your feet and all those kind of weeks or months of hard work are suddenly kind of down the pan, or feel like, you know, they might not be, but they kind of feel like what's going to happen to that. That's distressing.
Now, earlier you alluded to you struggled a little bit with burnout, but you didn't quite make it to the real clinical drop-off point. What happens when someone reaches that point? What are some of the cases that you might have seen and you might be able to share with us?
Yes, so there's 5 stages of burnout, and that's the 5th one. And for some people, I've had them having non-epileptic attack, like seizures, you know, and somebody who talked about how, you know, they were in hospital with cardiac problems, and the physician came round and said, you know, this looks like work-related stress as a reason for this. And she talked about how she'd be on the phone laughing to her boss saying, oh, it's okay, it's just work-related stress. So, you know, this wasn't a client of mine, this is a friend, just so, you know, I'm not breaking confidentiality, but yeah, these are kind of cases that the body will force a pause for you, essentially, if you don't find a way to pause. I've also had a couple of people who couldn't find their words, because the part of the brain involved with computing what is being said to you and forming words and speaking is a little part in the frontal lobes, and this can go all offline when we're in that level of high stress. So being unable to talk, panic attacks, struggling to get out of bed. You know, really, you have dropped all the balls. You just don't feel able to do all of the things at all. it can be quite distressing. Yeah, and you can be off work for a long time. There's one piece of research that says up to, not that you'd be off work for 4 years, but it takes the body about 4 years to come back.
Wow.
So that's a scary statistic, and that's an extreme end. But the main take-home message from this is our body is organic. We live in a world that's automated, and we treat our bodies like robots, and we can just keep going, and we can't. So we need to make sure we're treating it with tenderness, before it gets to that point. But if it has got to that point and anyone's listening thinking, I need a road back, it's absolutely possible to come out of that, but just go super slowly. Yeah.
When you say struggle to get out of bed, I think a lot of people have experienced extreme fatigue.
Yeah.
And they're like, I can't get out of bed this morning. I'm so tired. But what does it actually look and feel like? Because I think some people underestimate how tiredness and that feeling of I cannot move or get out of here really looks and can feel in the body.
I mean, yeah, it's that hopeless feeling. It's wanting to pull the cover over your head. Even like showering or brushing your teeth feels like an effort. It's intense, and you can feel not like yourself. It can be really scary for people around you who haven't seen you like that. And you can get those escapism thoughts, but you might also get suicidal thoughts. That level of escapism is, the ultimate escape, isn't it? So yeah, if you know someone or you're experiencing that, then this is definitely a time for intervention with a medical professional, GP, psychologist. Yeah.
Because some people might confuse that with depression.
Yeah.
So how do you determine if it's not?
It is confusing because depression and anxiety are both also kind of parts of the signs of burnout. So you just got to kind of think about what's been the context. So if you've had a period of what I mean by context is the things that have happened recently and what pressures you're under. So, in the situation of depression, usually there's been kind of like either big life losses, like a bereavement, or difficult things that might have kind of also been long-standing, but more around like loss. Whereas in burnout, usually it's that unmanaged stress. In the book, I talk about there's research that shows 6 common risk factors in a work. Do you want me to run through them now? Is this a good time? See if I can remember.
No pressure.
Yeah, okay. So the first is obvious. It's the one we've talked about most. It's high workload when you're under-resourced. There's too much to do, not enough time to do it. I think we all resonate with that, no matter where you work, because we don't often give ourselves enough funding for the projects we do. Second one is lack of community. So what you were saying earlier. So if we're kind of in isolation and we don't feel safe, or the department we're in is quite toxic and we're not supporting one another, then that's a risk factor. Lack of fairness. So if we see other people being treated in a way that, we're not being treated, this adds to burnout. And this is where, things like stigma and discrimination would also begin to sit as well. You're higher risk if you're in certain categories of, groups of people. That's 3. 4 is, conflict in values. So if you're being asked to do something you don't agree with. So I give an example of this quite commonly when I worked in the NHS, and they were asking us to see more and more people over the course of a week. I had to see them by fitting them in to shorter sessions and seeing them for fewer sessions, which didn't fit with my values around providing a certain level of service. So, sales teams, if you're being asked to sell something and be pushy, and the sharp end of that is moral injury, where, during over COVID, for example, people being asked to do things that was really just not in alignment at all with how they would want to provide care. So the next one is lack of control. So actually, I think sometimes early on, like, founders might not have this as a problem. I think it could be more of a problem in a paid employment, because you actually have quite a lot of control. But then it can quickly become the opposite of that, can't it? Because all the things are coming in and you don't have the staff, and you're wearing all the hats, and you can feel like you don't have control. But yeah, so thinking about your role perhaps as a manager, if you're micromanaging people, that makes it really hard, and you're much more likely to be at risk then. And the final one is if you're not getting sufficient rewards from your work.
Interesting.
So, for example, I often use the example as a parent. Parenting is hard work. and they're not grateful that you've cleaned them up or created a beautiful dish of food. Often they're the opposite of that, and they stomp all over it or chuck it on the floor. So it's the same in any work. You know, you need we don't need to save up all the gratitude for a big kind of fancy Christmas do. It needs to be little and often for gratitude, even for the stuff, especially for the stuff that we're doing all the time. It's almost like the kind of expected work that someone would do. And I think that can be particularly an issue if you're playing a small cog role in a longer system where you don't see the outcome. So if you've got a role like that where you don't see something all the way through and then go, oh, and here's this lovely finished product, then, you know, finding a way to show gratitude and support for that work in other ways is important. You look thoughtful.
Yes.
Do you feel like you hit any of those 6?
Yeah, I think maybe at different stages of my life I experienced all of it, but I don't think all of them at the same time. So how many of them have to be present for me?
They are risk factors, yeah. So just any of those could kind of cause and lead to them. But I agree. I think you can oscillate between them. And I think if you're hitting them all at work, if you've got something holding you up at home where you are getting, you know, gratitude or your good community, you can kind of make up for it a little bit. So it's thinking really broadly here as well. But I mean, ultimately, an unmanaged workplace stress needs to be managed better.
Yeah. So actually, I had a really nice discussion with one of my really good friends who started her company recently. I mean, she had her startup before, but now this is the new project. And I told her, look, you don't need to close down your current company or anything. Focus on this other project that keeps you excited and passionate a bit. And then this actually can give you a lot of motivation to continue your other project. That was my experience back in October, November time. And I felt like, this agency life is it's so stressful. You're dealing with a lot of clients, a lot of inquiries, a lot of expectations. It kind of feels like it's all up to you, especially with startups, because they might have not validated their market yet, the product, and then they tell you, okay, this is our product, sell it. No pressure, but basically it's up to you. So I felt like, it's maybe I need to. I was starting to lose a little bit of motivation, I would say, and the only thing that kept me going was actually discipline. But aside from that, I didn't really feel too motivated. And then my cousin found me with a completely new, a very random idea. I'm not going to give too much details, but it's basically an e-commerce store. And then I put a lot of hours into it. It didn't pay almost any money, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, enjoyed doing it. I just channeled this passion and motivation into my agency that other project gave me. So maybe what you talked about, like you can actually find that validation or that reward in other places, not only your current work, but maybe like other projects or other parts of your life, your relationship, your friends, and then just channel that energy into your work later. Yeah,
there's got to be reward coming from somewhere. You don't want all your work to feel a bit thankless and you're just grinding through, especially when it's your own projects and your own babies, and it's going to take a few years to get to the point where you want to see it flourish.
Yeah, and I think it's really like difficult to not take into your heart when someone comes to you with a request that, I've been working on this company for 3 or 4 years. Now it's time to scale, and you really want to help them, but then at some point you might have to say, well, you still need to go back to the drawing board, and then that's not what they want to hear. But you have to deal with that sort of pressure and those expectations, and you don't want to tell them exactly what they want to hear, but what is the reality. And you're that person who breaks the bad news occasionally. And then, of course, how do I, as the advisor, deal with maybe the founder having this moment of disappointment? Is of course another discussion and another
episode.
Topic. Yeah.
I think a lot of people, especially the founders and the entrepreneurs, might view burnout or this kind of, accumulation of stress as kind of a lack of mental resilience or a lack of physical resilience. And so I fear that a lot of these people would bury it, ignore it, push it to the side, push through, persevere. Like you said, you noticed that you were starting to suffer a little bit with burnout, but you kept going, and it was your discipline that kept you going until it's too late. I'm sure you see a lot of people like that where they thought that they were stronger than the thing that they were battling. What advice would you kind of give to these people? It's not about mental resilience, is it? It can happen to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, we're human. You don't know what kind of challenges are going to be thrown up in a business. And, I'm absolutely certain that most founders I've ever come across are doing their best because they're so passionate. It's like it is your baby. It's like another family member, isn't it? So you're giving your all. And I think, thinking about what your psychological pressures are that, might be impacting on your relationship with work is really helpful because, resilience can be misconstrued as kind of, survival of the strongest. And actually, our ancestors, it was survival of the people who paused and tended to themselves, really, but that's not as catchy. So allowing support in, recognising when to delegate and when to reach out. Reaching out just means asking for people for different opinions on how they do things sometimes. I mean, that's what asking for help looks like. I think the phrase asking for help can feel like, well, can't do that. That's for the weak people. But actually, this is what we talk about in therapy. Trying to support self-compassion involves allowing that support in, not just doing it for yourself through your breathing and your mindfulness. It's about actually having the connection and making them really deep and meaningful. And then, if you allow people in, there might be an opportunity later on down the line for you to offer your wisdom. It doesn't mean it's always going to be that one way and you're the weak pack. But it is really hard, just that word pack actually just reminds me, if you ever see an injured puppy or dog or they will go and hide because that's what we are built to hide, because the weak ones would be left behind or worse, put down or whatever because they're the runt or the ones. So we have that reaction in us for that reason. We don't want to be picked off by the others. So it's finding, the low-hanging fruit here. Who is the person who you do have some pre-existing trusting relationship with? Start there.
So I'm really curious if you have ever experienced any of the symptoms on yourself. What was that time, and what did you do to kind of come back?
Okay, great question. So in two capacities. So I worked in the NHS for several years, and then started working for myself. So in both contexts, so it's quite interesting for me to kind of approach it. So functional burnout, not the kind of clinical stopping, unable to kind of get out of bed level. But I think maybe my experience as a psychologist kind of helped me to kind of rein it in and recognise that I needed to kind of do something. So the first time was when I was working in a service, like I said, where they kept on putting on the pressure and starting to micromanage. We had to do measures every session that we hadn't been asked to do before. We had to see people for shorter time. Our ability to connect and have peer supervision was reduced because we had no time to do it. So nowhere to take these really heavy cases and just talk them through with other people. So I think I managed that through trying to enforce some connection, like, having WhatsApp groups with people, like trying to find the little ways to stay connected and offload. But I'm fortunate in that psychologists are more used to offloading. So we're used to kind of going, this is a bit rubbish. Like, how would you cope? And having a conversation with the manager that I was at capacity, and that, we need to find a way to do slightly less admin and what that looked like. Like sometimes it was practical things like not writing out the long letters anymore. It was just going to be a short letter, like finding the kind of hacks that other people were using. And also just recognising that just that 20 minutes out of the office at lunchtime to walk around the block did have payoff. Even though I never felt like I had a time for a lunch break, I had to go and do it. And so just forming a pact with a couple of other people that we would just do that And so you kind of holding yourselves as a compassionate accountability buddies for your breaks. So these are some of the tips that I had then. And now, well, I kind of experienced functional burnout after COVID when I'd moved to doing all online work, seeing a lot of traumatized clients all online, and then kind of coming straight downstairs and doing homeschooling with the kids. And my experience then was almost like I was falling head over heels with like exhaustion and overwhelm, and like I kept feeling like it was like an out of control feeling for me at that point. It's more vivid because it was more recent. Brain fog, kept forgetting things, putting like my keys in the fridge, getting a bit befuddled. It's also hard for me because it could be slightly perimenopause as well. So that's a whole extra ball game that any females listening might be thinking, how do you separate that out? Again, another episode. But yeah, I just realised I was doing too many things and I got myself a PA. So just invest in, and I just really struggled with that investment. First investment in getting help was the biggest leap for me, biggest leap of faith that it would be worthwhile. And now I can't imagine living without her. She just does a few hours a week, but I can send things to her. So that was probably one big step. And just having a proper break where I could, work with a coach again to kind of work out what I could say yes to and what I need to not say yes to, even though I wanted to say yes to all of it and it all seemed exciting, and actually I wasn't enjoying any of it, and that there was time for that. Like I just need some reassurance that it would be okay. I could follow those things up, but for now I just wasn't coping. But other signs for me, because I think you were saying, how did I recognise it, was also that I was struggling in sessions to feel that compassion and stay interested. And sometimes I would feel my mind wandering off. So those were a few of the signs for me that I was in burnout on both of those occasions, in case that's helpful for anyone listening.
Yeah.
I think for founders as well, obviously you're dealing with patients.
Yeah.
Founders, obviously they're dealing with employees or clients. And of course, if they're burnt out, that's going to have a trickle-down effect onto their clients or their employees. And if the employees are feeling it, then that's going to have an impact on the whole company. Have you seen that for yourself? Have you seen that for people who have come to you and kind of said, this is having an impact on my business? And how does that kind of present itself?
So burnout impacting business? Yeah, I think I have heard people talk about their business feeling like it's plateauing and they don't know why. And so that's where I've had conversations like, maybe it's plateauing because you can't have that creative thought and ability to kind of think clearly and in a structured way about everything at the moment. You know that you're kind of being productive, but in the little stuff rather than in taking that day for yourself as a CEO or founder, like to do that kind of thinking at a more strategic level. So I think yes, and also the happiness of your staff and well-being, and if people are off sick, these are good markers. So pay attention to them. There's a burnout report that is published once a year in January, and the recent 2 years have said, it's 1 in 5 people off sick with stress and burnout.
Wow.
Over course of a year, which is too high.
Yeah.
20% of the population.
Why is that so high?
Well, you have to read the whole report if you want the details, but they're particularly worried about younger people, the kind of 18 to 24 bracket being higher risk in that report. So, there's a lot of pressure on younger people to, they're less likely to be getting on the housing ladder. They might have more student debts. So there's, more financial pressures, and there's a lot of pressure to prove yourself and work on up the career ladder quickly. So I think if you're a manager in a business, just giving people the message that enjoy the ride, just get to grips with your role, making sure they've got fair compensation, that you're not taking the mickey, because these things really do impact on quality of life. And then people will be loyal and they'll stick with you, and you will nurture and invest in them, and they will often repay you.
You picked up on the 18 to 24, that's Gen Z. And we've kind of all seen the huge explosion of social media and the placed importance of how many followers have you got, what's your engagement like. And it's almost kind of reaching a point where our virtual lives are kind of taking over from our real lives. And it's almost as if we're living two lives now as well. You know, you've got to keep up with your social media presence, but you've also got to keep up with your day-to-day responsibilities. And I feel like Gen Z in particular probably feel that strain the most. Do you think that could also be a reason for why they might be feeling most burnt out?
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because I gave a talk recently to a local police department, and they were saying exactly that point. They feel like a lot of the younger staff are much more disengaged with what's going on because they're more likely to default to their phone. And my husband was listening to a podcast where it was an artist talking about her music gigs and noticing that when she's the warm-up act, a lot of the younger people will not really watch her at all. They'll be on their phone almost just waiting for the main act. So there's kind of almost like a tolerance for being in the moment when it's not really what they want.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think how that might be shaping us. I don't know if I've got an immediate answer to lead back to burnout, but there's changes, people are noticing them. And I think generally, if people live in their phones, it creates a barrier to having meaningful connections in the present. And that's the only way we co-regulate and feel safe, is through physical, engagement. It's not through a phone, because it's all smoke and mirrors on the phone. We know that really, but we're not really able to compute it on a way that we feel it, even though we know it logically.
Drawing from my own personal experience, a lot of my work is online, and I have a social presence, and I feel such a pressure to maintain that and to produce content. But at the same time, I've got all the other stuff going on in my real life that I'm trying to stay on top of, and my other clients, and making sure that I do those jobs super well. So I've kind of got these two really important facets of my life that I've got to maintain. And recently I've just stopped posting because I've just felt so burnt out from the pressure of having to constantly maintain that whilst I'm feeling at capacity in my actual day-to-day real life.
Yeah.
And I look at people who film everything and are so amazing at it, and they vlog everything, and some founders do it too. And I think, God, how on earth are you able to do it all? I find that so perplexing. And then it makes me feel like, I'm not good enough.
Yeah, I was going to say, we are designed to compare ourselves to other humans, and we get our sense of self-worth based on, like, where am I compared to that person? That can inspire us to keep going. It can also make us feel like, I'm not down there anymore, so we can see our progress. But when it's like that in burnout, the impact is that we feel worse. We feel like I'll never get to be like that person up there. And I'm scared that I'm going to end up like falling back down over here where those people aren't as good as me. So it can create extra stress. And the kind of number of followers, content, I think there are also companies that feed off that, because then you'll buy their products. And so it's remembering what works for you and your well-being. Over the summer, I deleted all the social media apps, a few days before I went on leave, and I said I was going to do that. And I had to try to have a break. But it's hard. And I documented how long it took me to stop getting the urges to check, the urges to create content in my head.
How long was it?
I did write a social media post about it on my LinkedIn when I got back, because I wrote. But definitely the urge to just mindlessly pick up my phone took a good 3 or 4 days. And I think it wasn't until towards the end of the 3-week holiday that I wasn't getting creation posts in my head, like, this is how I'd phrase this, or this is how I'd video this. And then it was interesting because when I came back, it felt like a slog getting back into it. I really didn't feel like it, which sounds like that's where you're at as well. And then it's like, but my business might suffer. But I just think of it now like a window shop front. And, even when I'm not creating, if I've got something going on there every so often, just to say, like, the shop's still open for business, then that's going to be good enough for me,
And you touched on how people feel like, if they step away from it, they're going to fall behind and they're going to end up down there and they'll never be as good as. How do you, reframe someone's mindset and say to them, look, it's okay to just stop. You're not going to, how do you, because that's exactly how I was feeling, or am feeling. And how would,
everything feels urgent.
Yes. How would you help a founder or an entrepreneur reframe that kind of very toxic mentality?
So I actually talk about the nervous system, which is our threat response kind of center, and how we often feel urgent and like we can't take our foot off the gas when we're in that 6th gear on the nervous system. And it's actually a sign that we're in 6th gear. You can't stay in 6th gear all the time. You wouldn't drive around, at 80 miles per hour, 70 miles per hour all the time. You got to come down your gears sometimes. So the sign is that everything feels urgent and everything feels like pressing, because our mindset shifts in that place, and that sympathetic nervous system energy shifts our cognitions into, feeling it's a threat if I don't. So it's remembering I'm in that mode right now, and I recognise it because it feels urgent. It all feels impossible to do anything different. So maybe that is the sign then that I need to do something to tend to myself here, and whatever that looks like for you. I don't know if you've got questions about that, or if you want me to touch on a few things. Like, I don't want to jump the gun here.
Yeah, so I think because you touched on social media and the validation side of it.
Yeah.
So I think it's really difficult when you're in sixth gear, you're driving like crazy, you never stop.
Yeah.
And then what you see on your Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever profile is, my engagement is dropping. People are less interested about me. But then actually your business might be doing better than ever.
Yeah.
But you don't see that validation, that social validation.
Yeah.
And then you start feeling like, this comes from a little bit of, personal experience as well. But what I see on other founders too. And you just start feeling so down. Like, oh, no one is actually interested about me. But then
violin.
It's not that, because at the end of the day, you're not. Why are you running this business? Why did you start in the first place? It's not to actually, impress anyone. It's because you want to solve an issue. Of course, you want to make money, and you want to have a good life. You want to maybe travel to more countries, and you want to, do something impactful. At the end of the day, it's not about what other people think, but social media it does exactly that to your brain, where you only think, okay, if people don't like my post, or they don't share it, or they don't engage, then I'm worth less.
Yeah. And it's really hard to measure the impact of other activities, isn't it? I mean, here we are recording a podcast, and I won't know how many listen figures you guys get, and that information isn't always shared with you. So, but then every so often, one person will think to reach out, and I mean, the number of times I've listened to something and thought that was helpful, never thought to reach out. You kind of know that it must be the tip of an iceberg. But yeah, it's hard to measure some stuff. So yeah, I think the way I manage that, and sometimes recommend to my clients to manage it, is to have, I've got a notebook where I've got a few pages where I write down things that I've achieved and nice things other people have said, and stick, cards, thank you cards and stuff like that in. So when I'm having that wobble because something didn't take off, or I don't know, or your numbers have kind of dropped, you can kind of stay firm, like, this is who I am. And I love your idea of like remembering your whys. And it was no one ever goes into a business to get lots of followers. That's not.
Well,
okay. Well,
maybe some.
Okay.
I guess it depends on the industry.
Sure.
Right? Maybe.
But that's in order to sell stuff, usually, isn't it? That's the usual, the end. Maybe not, but.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just depends, because you can actually become an influencer, right? And then that can turn into a business, and you get paid for your
product.
You are the product.
Yeah.
You get paid for your likes and your followers and your engagement.
True.
So then when that drops, your actual value drops.
That's intrinsically linked, like we touched on earlier.
That's really tough.
Linked.
Yeah.
So not sure if you've seen anything or like you have experience in that, Alex, like how that.
Yeah, massively. And actually, that's another reason I just had to take a step back from posting on social media, because I was becoming, you can't help it, no matter what mentality you go into with social media. If you are the product, and you're in the game, you cannot help but be affected mentally by the statistics, because ultimately, with some platforms you get paid for ad revenue. So TikTok, for example, I'm on the beta program where if you post a minute-long video and it gets a certain amount of views, whatever, you get paid for that. And if you're posting content and no one's viewing it, then you're like, oh, no one likes me, or I'm rubbish at this. Why am I even doing this? And you start doubting yourself, you start questioning yourself, and when you take a step back and see the big picture, your mind's just really playing tricks on you. But because the statistics say otherwise, you can't help but attach your worth to that. And I think it is dangerous, and I think it is so important to be aware, and to be aware of the algorithms as well, and how everything changes. And you can't, to stay on top of it consistently and constantly, you have to be on the ball every day, which is not always possible for everyone.
And across the different platforms as well, because it changes from, what you should be doing on this is now different to this. And
I think this can get really overwhelming for founders, just managing their presence, of course. Because you have a business to run at the end of the day. So from, again, my experience, we manage tens of clients of like their social media platforms and Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, everything. And we just don't really have time to create posts for our own accounts because like I have a team to manage. I have a company to run, do my accounts, all of that. Where do I have time? Where do I find time to actually create content for my own social media? That's why I really like this format, by the way, like the podcast, because I can actually create some value, or we can create some value, and then also produce content and have some content on our platform. So I guess so, like finding a way, like a manageable way that you can actually sustain for a company.
Yeah, I think also once you've been doing it for a little while, I found I started posting content in 2021 or 2022, and it changes over time. You can see that sometimes things were working for a bit over here and now they don't work so well. So I think that helps a bit with the resilience, like seeing that things go in waves or, seasons. So I try and remind myself like that as well. And maybe this isn't a season of growth. Maybe this is a season of nurturing my existing, audience, for example, because the algorithm's not playing games with me.
Yeah. And people forget about that. It's quite a cruel mistress.
And I was going to ask actually, Claire, so you have a good following base actually, like you have a couple of thousands of followers, which is much more than many clinical psychologists do on Instagram. That's how I found you actually. You went to a lot of podcasts, you have your own Instagram, you are very active on it. So what I also realized is a lot of people, a lot of experts getting on Instagram who are actually not psychologists, who actually have nothing to do with psychology. They just start posting like memes and funny pictures and false information sometimes. So
fake news.
Fake news, exactly. Yeah.
Or sample size of one news, which is psychologists come from the evidence base, and unfortunately it doesn't sell as well to say that, whereas a kind of it happened to me feels like a strong narrative, but it does mean it's a sample size of one. So but or
they cherry pick studies.
Yes, exactly.
So how, first of all, how does it make you feel first, like when you see a content like that? And then how do you think other medical professionals, not only psychologists, but clinical psychologists in your case, can have their own social media presence with the right information and make sure that people listen to them?
That was two questions.
Two questions.
I liked the first one. It was a psychologist question. How does that make you feel?
Yes. How does it make you feel? Yeah. First of all, how does it make you feel?
Right. Start with that. Frustrated. Yes. So I am in a small group of I set up a Facebook group for psychologists with visibility. It's got a terrible name, something like that, visible psychologists or something, because I thought we need to all support each other. We need to support the algorithm as well. So when we post something, we've really put our heart and soul into a post, we'll hop on and we'll say, would you mind supporting me? And I know that they'll also make thoughtful comments. It won't just be because they're,
Great
really
post.
interested. Yeah, exactly. It's not just that. It's like they understand it. And also to share anything that we're selling, because we know that it's good quality because it's regulated professionals who've put it together. So I love sharing stuff with my own audience when I know it's been well crafted. And so yes, there was a movement, a government petition because it's like the term psychologist isn't regulated, clinical psychologist is. So that means anyone with a psychology kind of undergrad degree can say that they're a psychologist, which is dangerous. And there have been stories in the press of that going, wrong for people who don't understand. It's such a tricky place to navigate. Like, what's the difference between a psychologist and a clinical psychologist or counselling? And counsellor and all of this. So yeah, look for the regulating body and try and follow people, HCPC psychologists, because what you're absorbing on there will stay. And often, I think when people have had training in media or PR, their accounts take off quicker because they've got all that background training, whereas clinical psychologists haven't got that training. We've trained in the NHS as clinicians, so we're having to learn on the job and as we go, and so it's clunky. And so sometimes we do look a bit scrappy and we don't make the beautiful posts, but what is inside it should be good quality. And I think there are psychologists like me trying to learn the game so we can do both.
Like you produce content for the algorithm that you know is going to work, not necessarily what you want. It's what the audience wants, what the people on this platform want. So you can share an amazing blog article, a really long post about burnout, but then it's not going to have any impact on your profile because no one's going to read it. So how can you put that information into a video, for example, that is more engaging and move something in the viewer? If you have any thoughts on that, Alex.
Well, I couldn't just get out of my head just then about how many people are self-diagnosing these days because of, like you say, the people who are making videos that are going viral. They're throwing out stuff that the algorithm and the people want to see. Everyone's self-diagnosing with autism and self-diagnosing with ADHD.
And burnout.
I mean, that's a whole other podcast to talk about.
Yeah.
Because there's no nuance in those posts. And that's where psychologists lose people, because we're like, well, it's a bit this over here and it's this. Yeah. And that's not catchy for a reel, you know. But yeah, and also the other thing, a negative hook tends to be preferred by the algorithm, and ethically that's tricky for us. You know, we want to make sure we're hooking people, but not so it all sounds doom and gloom.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it is tricky. I find I talk faster on my reels than I talk normally.
Yes, me too.
Keep attention. Yeah, and I'm like looking back, thinking, crikey. And I do the whole cutting off. So I'm just from the moment I open my mouth and start talking. So I'm not kind of, all those tricks, you know, are important. So you just need to look and see what's working on other accounts and use that for your own stuff.
Do you think that also could be contributing to burnout? The fact that we're processing so much information so quickly. Like when someone posts a video, it's sped up. I mean, on TikTok now, you can 2x the speed. So listen to it quicker. People cut out their pause breaks.
Yeah, didn't know that. On what?
Yeah.
Sorry, on TikTok?
On TikTok.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do that all the time. I YouTube as well, because if they speak too slowly,
It frustrates you.
It frustrates me.
Yeah.
I actually like really fast talking. I started a TikTok channel not so long ago. It's in my own native language, and I speak like extremely fast. When I show my friends, they're like, "This is not how you speak normally." Like, no, it's specifically for TikTok. It's like a
I'm gonna have to go and find you.
fast-paced content.
I wonder how many people are listening to this on 1.25.
Yeah. Oh, they've switched off because it's too slow. But if you could think about, you know, we're on our phones. The average screen time is probably, 6 hours a day for most people. And you're consuming so much in such a short space of time. Our brains can only process so much, really. Is that also a factor for burnout?
I mean, yeah, I do talk about that in my book, about how overstimulation and being on, you know, even when people think they're relaxing, they might be watching a TV program, but they've got their phone and they're doing the Tesco shop.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it's the hashtag, whatever it is, and they're messaging on there. So you're multitasking it all the time, and you're kind of getting that quick dopamine feedback from your phone that you might not be getting during a slow scene on the telly. So it does shape your brain, all of this. It does mean that's what we get used to. And it means that when we try and come down our gears into neutral, we feel like a bit jittery and like something's missing. And we get that agitation and like guilty thoughts coming down the gears because it feels like I should be up here still. I should have my foot on the gas. So it's that I don't feel safe feeling being kind of created. So we just have to recognize that we get this almost like a dopamine crash when we start to withdraw.
Like addicts.
Yeah, exactly. And I say that to my kids when they come off their computer games, for example. You know, you feel agitated, this will last for a little while. Go and jump on the trampoline, let it out. You know, we can use movement too as adults. I do something until I feel pleasantly tired, because then I know I've got rid of the cortisol, the stress hormones, the dopamine, and it's much easier then to come into a kind of a rest. Because if we try and rest when we're in our sympathetic nervous system, stillness can be interpreted as a threat because we're in the fight or flight, which is both kind of very movement-based actions, which what your body's trying to do. So if you discharge all of that energy, all of that stress, it's easier to come into stillness.
So prevention is obviously better than cure. What are some, if you had to write like a checklist of things that founders or entrepreneurs can make sure they're implementing in their everyday to day to prevent reaching burnout, or okay, let's do to prevent reaching burnout first, and then we can do
what can you do
if you are at burnout.
Okay, great. So remember, if you are your own boss, you're at the mercy of your worst critic.
Yourself.
Yeah. So
Definitely.
what does that look like? You know, are you always on? You need to create, and I know it seems really boring to actually write some sort of policy, but you know, when I was in the NHS, I would have an annual review, and I would have a boss who would say, when did you last go on leave? You probably don't do that for yourself. So create some sort of checklist around times when you can, you know, what is your limit for being at work? For me, it's 6 to 7 weeks. I mostly marry it up with the school holidays now, and I just say to my clients, I don't work in the school holidays, and they all know that. I've set expectations, set the out of office. So think about when you're going to be taking breaks and plan your calendar around that, not just around the quarterly deadlines of, you know, meeting targets and things like this. Invest in yourself as early as possible for boundaries around work, like I did with my PA. You'll keep thinking, I could do that myself. And that's the thought that will keep derailing you, and it will hold your business back because, you know, it's who, not how. You need people in your business who are more skilled at certain things, and invest in them. What else? Just make your business a pleasant place that you want to be. Like self-care has this idea and misnomer almost as being something that we do, which is like a big thing, like a spa day or, you know, the bubble bath. And actually, self-care should be about doing those little regular habits so you're building a life that you don't regularly want to escape from. So what can your routine look like that allows for that? You know, maybe it is the jog after the school run, or, you know, a longer lunch break, walking meetings that start at 10 past the hour rather than on the hour, so you can have that comfort break. There are practical things. Draft yourself an out of office email. There's a trust I work with at the moment, working with someone in an NHS trust, and they've been told, here is a bit of prose to put into your out of office, so that says that I won't respond and I will actually delete any email sent to me during these hours.
Goodness.
Yeah,
Brutal.
and that we support that because they recognise coming back from leave is really stressful, isn't it? Because you're worried about how many emails you have. And somebody I'm working with said that it took 2 bouts of leave for that to kick in as being effective. The first time, people followed up and said, you didn't respond to my email. And she had to stick to her boundaries and say, did you see my out of office? And then they were like, oh, okay. We just thought that was, you know, meh. And so it took her for the second bout of leave where she repeated it. She came back 2 or 3 emails, and that was it. Wow. So it does work, but don't expect boundaries to work immediately.
When you are a business owner, how do you put some measures in place so that you know that your colleagues, that your employees will feel okay working at this company, and they never reach burnout? So maybe if you can give some measures or what they can do as business owners to help their employees.
I mean, I would love it if all leaders had some sort of compassionate leadership training. So I know that's probably not what you were thinking at that level of investment, but really we just expect ourselves to know how to lead and manage. But that's not a skill a lot of us is born with, you know. And probably you've got to the point of being a founder because you're a great technician at the thing that you kind of, you know, the skills that you have in other areas of the business, not necessarily people management. So, you know, thinking about compassionate leadership and the foundations to that, and think of the role models you've had in your life where that's been done really well. You know, they were probably good listeners. You know, they really made you feel like you were important and that your needs were really important and you were a valued person. You know, going around and asking how can I support you in your role, making assumption that people are doing their best, and if people have got bereavements or difficult things going on outside life, that is really given the space it needs, because work, you know, needs to feel safe. making sure there's regular check-ins so the team are working well as a team. I think the worst thing a company can do is have competitiveness between colleagues where they're being measured against each other. You know, I've worked with people who will get like a weekly roundup of, you know, billing hours or that kind of thing. So they're compared. And actually when people work as a team, so like this is the team's efforts and that is fed back and supported, and you're rewarding that verbally and saying, I see that, I see you're working hard. That's massive, isn't it? Because people know they're being seen and you know, appreciated. And just, making sure people have good leave and they're taking it, and that you're valuing your own leave and taking your leave, because modelling works. If people see that you are a manager who stops and takes breaks and values your after work time, goes to those, you know, tennis trainings and goes to the gym and does all, you know, goes to their kids' school plays, those send powerful messages that we value all of that, friends and family.
A little game for you. You actually touched on like mental health apps and a little bit of like innovation, how you can use your smart devices to different things. Mm-hmm. So how do you see this space evolving, a field of clinical psychology and burnout? You can focus on that. So in, let's say, 20 years, what do you think, how we will be able to manage our anxieties, our burnout differently? What do you think would be a great future?
That's a huge question.
A simple question, I told you.
Do you know, the problem is I watched Black Mirror last night. Do you ever watch Black Mirror? It's just so dark. My brain goes to all the dark.
Watch it. It freaks me out.
Yeah. What did you see in that episode?
Oh no, well, it's just generally, it was the one with where she needs a brain transplant and she's linked to the web and then starts doing ads through to people. She doesn't even know she's doing these adverts. But yeah, so I mean, this is the danger, and he riffs off how everything's subscription, you know, service. But I'm going down a completely dark Black Mirror route. It's not going to answer your question.
Kind of love it, but
I suppose that the ideal would be that compassionate leadership goes all the way up to the top in terms of government, you know, policies, so that supports a lot of founders in their, a lot of, you know, the values that a lot of people, I'm sure, social entrepreneurs, change makers have around social justice. God, this is a big answer. But yeah, I didn't expect to go this way. But it's just, you know, if that can be woven into everything and how we're schooling and bringing youngsters up, it just has a massive impact on how we behave and have our relationship with work. So it's got to kind of be coming from the top and going to the schools and parents, so that we can be bringing up children who are going to have a healthier work-life relationship. And, you know, in 20 years' time, that could be different. I'm doing a talk with a school soon about how to prevent burnout in their children. And I'm going to start with, you know, the parents.
Burnout in children, that's crazy to
well,
think.
But as adults, like making sure, but yeah, I mean, there is a book now for burnout in adolescents, because, you know, we're expecting them to do 11, 12 GCSEs sometimes, no time for any of their downtime or just, and so we're sending the message, be on all the time, do, achieve. And we've got parents who have been, you know, squeezed by the fact there's not enough school places, and there's demands on like the prices of, you know, education and university. And so that has been kind of filtering down and making parents work harder. They're less likely to be around having family time, less likely to be completely switched off from work when they're eating their dinner or on holidays. And kids all see this, and that's the implied message is it's dangerous to relax.
Yeah.
Now the big question. When it is finally time to reset and someone has reached that point of breaking point, essentially, you can't just go on holiday and take a nap or a bubble bath, like you said. Like you said, it's going to take 4 years. What actually happens when someone needs to recover?
So it depends if you are realising, listening to this, for example, that you're in functional burnout or kind of I've crashed and clinical burnout. Yeah. If you are unable to get out of bed and you're really struggling, then you've got to go really slowly. And like I said, professional help will help, because a lot of it's going to need a bit of scaffolding, and sometimes there's crisis management as well at that point. You know, you might go right back to basics with just trying to get a basic routine into your day, getting up and walking the dog, getting up and making yourself a sandwich. You know, we do strip it back and we go back to what the basic building blocks for being healthy. You know, it's nutrition, it's exercise, it's daylight, it's movement. It's something kind of stimulating that's not around work. Like, and what will that look like for each person? It will be different for everybody. And where are you at with being able to do any of that right now? Some people, you know, haven't maybe spoken to a friend for a long time. They felt like it's too, no, they don't want them to know that they're off work. So like working out where that connection's going to be. But if someone's not quite there, then it's about preventing it getting to that point. So recognizing that I need to get some support in my life, compassionate accountability, like I said, to slow down and take those pauses. And I talk about, you know, micro pauses with my clients, like when you transition between an activity. So, you know, when we finish this podcast, for example, just listen in, like tune into your body. You referenced that earlier, that we're not good at being attuned anymore because we're so on our screens. You know, maybe you do need to stretch. Maybe you do need to have a glass of water. Like, it's often the basic stuff, and we don't listen to our body, so we don't know, and that stops it escalating into something more. And yeah, just making compassionate decisions around your timetable so you've got more transition points. So I've worked with people who say, I don't transition between, it's just one like long meeting. So, wait, but it's not. They're just back-to-back meetings. Or they're seeing, for example, spoke to a psychologist recently who said she would have 60-minute sessions on the hour, and the client would be in the waiting room waiting. No time to go to the toilet, write her notes, have a cup of tea, anything. That's not a compassionate decision. So like just 5 minutes, even like just to move, just to listen in and think of it as like, before I go into the next activity, what will that require of me? Like, you wouldn't go out into the snow without putting your coat on, but we often just bumble through, you know, and then we're not in a clear head. We will drop things and make mistakes.
And how would someone go about finding a therapist or clinical help or psychological help? Because, you know, you Google psychologist near me or whatever it is you're Googling, and you are just inundated with information. A lot of people don't want to go through the NHS because it takes too long. So what are some good websites or some good resources that people can look out for or make sure they head to?
So if they've got the capacity for some self-directed stuff, my book, obviously.
Of course.
I have to drop that in. So Burnout, How to Manage Your Nervous System Before It Manages You. If you want to take the next step and are ready for that, or that's not quite enough for what you need, talking therapies is the NHS option. There are directories for private practitioners, like Counselling Directory in Psychology Today. And what you're needing to look for is, as I said earlier, accreditation. So double check what the governing body is of that practitioner. Counselling clinical psychologists, it's the HCPC. And I'm not able to list them all off here, what they all are, but just do your due diligence, because that's the thing in the NHS. When you see a psychologist, they've done their due diligence for you. So don't make assumptions, and ask, have you worked with this kind of difficulty before? Ask, how would you work with me? What would be your treatment plan? These questions early on, before you get into kind of, you know, further down the line, can help you see, is this going to be the right fit for me? Is it what I need right now? Yeah.
It's quite interesting. Just wanted to add to that. And just talking a little bit of the social media part again. Do you think it's also important for clinical psychologists to be present on Instagram and social media, because then their patients, their clients can actually see their faces before, can understand their personality, how they talk, what their perceptions of life are, how they think about different conditions and what they specialize in, or you think this is something that people could just explore on NHS, see the name, call them, and that's it?
I mean, I think you have some people who can see a picture and feel like just that's enough for me, and other people, I'm a bit like that. I like to know what they've written. I like to see a video, and I like to kind of get to know them. So you have different people with different levels of need for that. But I do think it is helpful. That said, like, I run an associate practice, and I have vetted and handpicked other psychologists and CBT therapists and EMDR therapists who I know are really aligned with my worldview and approach. And they are very nervous of going onto social media, and they are not also set up for that because they're part-time in the NHS. So I've spent a lot of time like nurturing the skill of going onto social media and developing my confidence. So I am like the face or spokesperson for my practice. And when people come in, we offer that matching service. So they're matched with a clinician who is, you know, got the right like models and therapy time. So I think there is a way around that as well. But yeah, I think generally having more of a presence on social media is really helpful, because if we don't step into that space, other less qualified people will.
Interesting. So interesting how it can actually be, can have a very positive impact on you and your professional development as well.
Yes.
If you get on social media,
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
You get a lot of feedback, but not only that, but just talking in front of camera, coming to these kind of podcasts. And how do you think it has actually contributed to your professional development?
Yeah, I think it's certainly helped with my CPD, because whenever I go on a podcast, you know, for example, if I'm talking about burnout in slightly different angles, I'll reread my stuff, and I might see what else has been printed since I researched for the book. So I'm keeping on top of, you know, my continued professional development and what has been published. And it's wonderful for making connections. Like I've met you two today, and what I found with, you know, certain connections then lead to collaborations, and a project is born that you weren't even expecting, but you get into these, especially a podcast, you get quite deep conversations. It's like longer form content, isn't it? And so, yeah, I think that's been really fun and wonderful. And you develop a way of parceling up information in a way that's very on point. And I use metaphors and ways for delivering on my social media for my clients, and sometimes vice versa. And occasionally a client has come out with a beautiful gem, and I'll say, I think this would be really lovely the way you've phrased that. Would you consent to me using that, you know, as a metaphor or something online? And people, that boosts their confidence to feel like I'm giving back, and that's been a really nice surprise as well. I don't share content obviously unless that's been consented to in that way, but so yeah, that's a few examples.
So final question, if you had 10 minutes with a room full of business owners, what's that one advice that you'd give them?
I think it'd be that you are already enough. Like, I think a lot of people really strive to show the world that they can do something, and they've got it in them, and that can be very woven into a lot of our day-to-day interactions. You know, you're already enough, and there are people in your life who really value you. So don't let that be the reason. Don't do things from a fear place. Stay connected to the positive motivations that really light you up. And if you feel lost from that, regroup, take a pause so that you can come back to that. Because when you're really connected with your positive motivations, rather than a fear of, you know, doing things wrong or getting rejected or being humiliated, you know, the quality of work that comes out of your business will just be so much more on point.
Thank you so much.
What would yours be?
That there's more to life than making money and being what society deems as successful. I mean, I learned that the hard way by, you know, I got really ill, and a lot of what caused me being so ill was by me pushing, constantly pushing. I had a long stint with anorexia and bulimia, and that all stemmed from, well, lack of emotional, you know, like repressed emotions, and also from pushing myself, you know, want that point of perfectionism. And I wasn't sleeping much because I was working, so I was working 7 days a week, and my body just couldn't cope anymore. It literally just broke down. And I had a whole 180 flip in my brain that, you know, I started, you know, getting back in contact with things that I enjoyed doing as a child, so horse riding and gardening, and I couldn't physically exercise to the level that I was before either. So then I did a lot more yoga, and then that helped with my mental health too, and getting in contact with my body, feeling what my body needed that day or wanted that day. And I just kind of removed myself from that rat race in a way, and seeing that the trajectory I was on was just self-destruction because I was so focused on being the best, doing the best, making the most money, being the most successful. And I just completely missed out on all the other amazing things in life that have nothing to do with that.
It's like you removed all the noise, disconnected from that like smoke and mirrors stuff. It's like a spell was broken.
Yeah.
And you were able to connect to all those lovely things.
Yeah. But I had to get sick. I had to hit rock bottom
That's
to
the
realise
thing.
that,
Yeah,
sadly.
the body stopped.
And my message would be to people like, you don't have to get to that point of rock bottom or extreme burnout, clinical burnout, or breaking point to realise those things. But I think sometimes, sadly, people do to have that real cognitive change.
In the book I call that post-burnout growth. That shift in thinking. Like it's not necessarily a negative thing if you have burnt out. You can hold on to the changes in the way you have, which is really inspirational.
Yeah. I think there's still like the part of you will always mourn the person you once were as well. You know, that person who was able to just power through and accomplish so much, because your brain has this amazing tendency to forget all the bad parts.
Yeah.
Your brain is really good at filtering out the bad things that happen to you.
Yeah. Just feel invincible, don't we? Quite often we forget we have limits.
Yeah, exactly.
We're organic.
So that would be my little piece of wisdom.
Yeah, and I think so many messages, but taking action early, probably from what you taught us today, it's really important to look out for the signs and tackle them as soon as you see one, and just reflect on your day-to-day life, what you do in a daily. Do you stay at home too much? Are you like a social person, but you haven't been seeing your friends for a long time? Do you like exercises, but you don't exercise anymore? If you just start seeing these signs, then probably it's time to take action.
I think it's nice that everyone shared.
Yes.
Sharing circle.
Yeah.
Sharing circle, exactly.
And so before we go, can I give you a gift of my book each?
Oh my gosh, yes please.
I'd love to.
Right. So who would like the American version? Who would like the UK version?
Ooh.
What you pick?
You pick first.
Ladies first.
Ladies
I'll have the
first.
English version then.
The English, okay.
Thank you very
There
much.
we go. So the US version is called The
US
Trauma of
version.
Burnout.
And once I've
Okay.
finished it, I'll pass it on to some friends that I think could
Who needs
benefit.
it? Yeah, pass it to someone.
Here you go. Have you read this book yet?
There's a little bit
Oh,
mark as well.
fabulous.
It's lovely.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. A huge thank you to Dr. Claire Plumbly and, of course, Balazs for today's episode, and to you guys for listening. If you felt like today's episode resonates with you, please do share it with someone who you think could benefit from it. And, of course, please do follow us on all social media at Benton Creative, and subscribe to our Growth Scope newsletter at bentoncreative.co.uk. We'll see you next time.